I never thought I'd see the day when my own family would treat me like a stranger in my own home. Yet there I was, standing just out of sight, watching my daughter-in-law glide through the front door with two women I had never seen before. She carried herself like the lady of the house, pointing out the crown molding, gesturing toward the kitchen island, and describing future furniture as if the decisions were already hers to make. Every word hit me like a stone. This was the house I had chosen carefully, bought quietly, and poured my heart into. It was supposed to be a surprise, a gift for the people I loved most. Instead, I was staring at a performance my daughter-in-law pretending to be the owner, while I hid like an intruder. I gripped the frame of the doorway, disbelief coursing through me. How could she walk my halls as though I didn't exist? How could she smile and promise these guests that her family would enjoy holidays in the very dining room I had imagined filling with laughter?
My name is Linda Parker. I'm 64 years old, recently widowed, and I thought I understood loyalty, sacrifice, and family. Losing my husband left me vulnerable, and I trusted my son and his wife to care for me the way I had cared for them all their lives. But standing behind that door, my trust shattered. I realized I was not their family anymore. I was just an obstacle between them and what they wanted. You might be wondering how it ever came to this, how a house meant as a blessing turned into a battleground. To answer that, I need to take you back a few months, to when everything seemed different. 3 months earlier, my life looked very different. I was still finding my footing after losing my husband, Daniel. The silence in the evenings felt unbearable, and every corner of our old house carried his memory. I tried to fill the emptiness with routine morning coffee, quiet walks, stacks of unfinished books, but grief has a way of seeping into everything. During those first months, my son David and his wife Rachel visited often. At first, it felt comforting. They checked in on me, brought meals, and spoke with gentle concern about how hard it must be to live alone. I wanted to believe it was love, but even then, there were small moments that didn't sit right, like when their questions circled back to my finances, or when Rachel's eyes seemed to brighten whenever I mentioned Daniel's life insurance. Still, I brushed it aside. They were family. Surely their intentions were good. When I spotted the listing for the old Victorian on Maplewood Avenue, something inside me lit up. The wraparound porch, the wide kitchen, the 6 bedrooms I could imagine Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, grandchildren running down the hallway. It felt like a place where new memories could grow. For the first time since Daniel's passing, I felt a spark of excitement. But a quiet voice told me to keep this decision private. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was caution after years of watching Rachel's subtle frowns whenever I spent money on myself. So I set up a trust, hired a management company, and signed the papers without telling a soul. I pictured the day I would reveal it, David and Rachel standing in awe, Tyler racing through the rooms, laughter echoing off freshly painted walls. I imagined handing them the keys, watching their faces light up with joy. It was going to be a gift of love, a new chapter for all of us. Back then, I never could have guessed how differently things would turn out. Not long after I closed on the Victorian, David and Rachel called me, brimming with excitement. They said they had found a house that might be perfect for their family. My heart skipped a beat when I heard the address. Of all the homes in town, they had landed on the very one I had just purchased. At first, I thought it was fate, that maybe everything was falling into place more beautifully than I had planned.
but the more they talked, the colder my stomach felt.
They described the kitchen as if it was already theirs. Rachel spoke about hosting dinner parties and redecorating the master suite. She didn't speak as though she were hoping it sounded like she was claiming. Then came the comment that stung the most. She suggested that David and she would take the large upstairs bedroom, and perhaps I could stay in the smaller room near the guest bathroom. Small, but adequate. She called it adequate for me, in the very house I had chosen, paid for, and imagined as a gift.
I tried to smile through the suggestion, but inside, something shifted. Their words weren't about sharing a home. They were about placing me in a corner, shrinking me into the role of an afterthought. And then, as if to seal the manipulation, Rachel brought up Daniel. She said he would have wanted his family taken care of, that investing in a home together would honor his memory. I remember sitting there, nodding slowly, even as my chest tightened. The way she invoked his name, it wasn't love or remembrance. It was a weapon, used to push me into a decision that would benefit them most. That was the first time I truly felt the cracks. I wanted to believe in their kindness, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My gift, my dream, suddenly felt less like a blessing and more like bait. And that uneasy feeling only grew stronger when I saw them inside the house with my own eyes.
The morning I planned to finally reveal the surprise, I decided to stop by the house early, just to take it all in one more time before sharing it with David and Rachel. The sun was streaming through the windows, the hardwood floors gleamed, and every detail of the renovation made me proud. For a moment, I let myself imagine the joy on their faces when they realized it was theirs. But as I pulled up, I noticed Rachel's car already in the driveway. I stayed back, curious, and what I saw next turned my excitement into a pit in my stomach. Rachel was in the yard, gesturing as if she were leading a tour, her voice carrying confidently. She waved her hands toward the garden, described where she'd put furniture, and spoke about the master suite as though it had been designed for her. When David joined her, they walked through the house like a couple inspecting their future home. They measured windows, discussed paint colors, and laughed as they planned where their belongings would go. I realized with a jolt that they weren't looking, they were claiming, and in all their talk of our home, I was nothing but an afterthought. The harshest blow came when I overheard Rachel dismissively mention that I could settle into the smaller guest room. The house I had purchased, the sanctuary I had imagined as a gift of love, had already been rearranged in their minds to make me small and invisible. In that moment, the truth hit me harder than any grief I'd felt before. They weren't concerned for me. They weren't planning for us. They were planning for themselves, and I was simply a pawn in their vision. I had two choices: reveal the truth and watch them mask their disappointment, or keep quiet and see just how far they were willing to go. My heart ached, but my mind grew sharper. I decided to let the game play out, and soon, their next move would reveal more than I ever imagined. The very next morning, David called me with a tone I recognized immediately, the careful, measured way he spoke when he was trying to persuade me into something. He told me that another family had already expressed interest in the house, that an offer might be coming in soon, and that if we wanted a chance, we'd have to act quickly. I almost laughed to myself. I knew there was no other family. No competition. That house was already mine. But listening to my own son spin this story with such conviction chilled me more than if it had been true. Rachel joined in,
pressing harder. She reminded me of how Daniel had always wanted our family to thrive, how he would have encouraged me to invest in their future. She spoke his name with such ease, wrapping her pressure in a cloak of sentimentality. But it wasn't love, it was strategy. I could feel her trying to twist my grief into compliance, using the memory of the man I had lost as leverage against me. Inside, I burned with outrage. Every word felt like a betrayal, a fresh wound cut by people who should have been my comfort. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I steadied my voice, nodding along, agreeing to think about it. They thought they were winning me over, but in reality, I was memorizing every tactic, every angle they tried. I knew then that this wasn't just wishful thinking on their part, it was a pattern, a manipulation carefully crafted to drain me of both my money and my place in their lives. I could feel the anger simmering beneath my calm expression, but I refused to let them see it. If they wanted to play this game, I would play it better. I decided to watch, wait, and prepare. And the first step would be to protect myself, to secure my house in a way that left no doubt about who it truly belonged to. By this point, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope things would resolve themselves. If I wanted the truth, I had to protect myself and my home. So I called a locksmith, and within hours, every lock on that house was changed. The very next day, I hired a security company to install cameras at every entrance. It felt excessive at first, but a part of me knew it was necessary. I needed eyes on every door, proof that couldn't be twisted or denied. The first morning after the cameras were active, I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, scrolling through the feed on my phone. That's when my heart stopped. On the screen, there was Rachel, standing on the porch, trying to slide a key into my front door. Not once, but several times. She stepped back, frowned, and tried again. When it didn't work, she moved to the back door, her frustration growing. I could almost feel her anger through the camera lens. Shock ran through me, followed by a cold wave of vindication. She had a key somehow. She had gotten one. And now I had proof she wasn't just pushing me with words. She was actively trying to take control of what was mine. Later that day, David called me. He tried to sound casual, asking if I had heard anything strange about the house, if maybe squatters had broken in, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him I had seen Rachel myself, caught on the cameras, trying to use a key she shouldn't have. There was silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that told me his excuses had finally run out. In that moment, I knew their scheme was unraveling, and the confrontation I had been dreading was now inevitable. When I finally sat across from David, the weight of everything between us pressed heavier than the silence in the room. I asked him plainly how Rachel had gotten a key to my house, and I watched his face crumble. For a moment, I saw the little boy I once raised caught in a lie, desperate to explain. He admitted that it was Rachel's idea, that she had been pushing, persuading, insisting this was the best thing for the family. Hearing those words didn't comfort me, it broke me. Because while Rachel may have started it, David had gone along. My own son, the child I sacrificed so much for, had chosen silence instead of honesty. That realization hit me harder than any scheme Rachel could devise. It wasn't just her betrayal I was grieving, it was his weakness. Later, Rachel faced me directly, her voice steady, her expression almost defiant. She said she hadn't meant harm, that everything she did was for the sake of the family. She insisted I was misinterpreting her actions, that trying to take over the house wasn't selfish but responsible. She even painted her behavior as a kind of protection, that she was making sure resources were used wisely. Her words were polished, almost rehearsed, but empty of remorse. I searched her eyes for any trace of guilt, any flicker of understanding of what she had done to me. But there was nothing there. Only calculation. Only justification. I realized then that we weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. Rachel didn't see herself as wrong. To her, this was simply strategy, a clever way to get what she believed was already hers to take. And David, my son, had let her pull him into it. As I sat there, my grief turned to clarity. Their kindness had been nothing but a mask, and their promises were tools to bind me. I thought the worst was behind me, but deep down, I could feel it. This wasn't the end of their scheming. Something darker was waiting to surface. I thought I had already seen the worst of Rachel's manipulations, but I was wrong. One evening, she came to me alone, her tone softer than usual, almost rehearsed. She spoke about finances, about planning ahead, about protecting the family from unnecessary burdens. Then, with a calmness that chilled me, she suggested that I transfer the house into David's name for tax purposes. At first, I almost couldn't process what she was saying. She framed it as practical, even generous, how it would save money, how it would prevent complications later. But beneath the polished words, I heard the truth. She wanted me to sign away everything. The home I had bought, the one I had poured my grief and hope into, was nothing more than a prize in her scheme. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't just manipulation. This was a plan. She wanted to corner me into thinking it was my own idea, to make me believe it was for my benefit, when in reality, it was the final step in stripping me of control. That was the moment the anger surged, not the hot, reckless anger that clouds judgment, but a sharp, steady flame that brought everything into focus. I finally saw it for what it was, elder financial abuse. I was being targeted not just as a grieving widow, but as an asset to be managed, a resource to be drained. And I knew, then and there, that it would stop. I refused to let grief or loneliness blind me any longer. I refused to keep sacrificing myself on the altar of family loyalty that only served those who saw me as a means to an end. I had spent months believing I could rebuild family by giving more, but giving had only invited betrayal. This wasn't about saving money on taxes. It was about power, and I was done handing mine over. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of strength return to me. My decision was clear. I would protect myself, my home, and my future. Whatever guilt they tried to lay at my feet, I would no longer carry it. In the weeks that followed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time since Daniel's passing, I wasn't constantly on edge, waiting for the next wave of grief or manipulation. My house finally felt like mine, not a battleground, not a bargaining chip, but a sanctuary. I started unpacking slowly, filling each room with pieces of my life: family photographs, books that had traveled with me for decades, quilts I had stitched with my own hands. Every corner I touched became warmer, more alive, and little by little, I invited others in, not David and Rachel. Not yet, but people who had shown me genuine kindness. The neighbors, for instance. The couple next door who brought me flowers when I moved in. The widow across the street who welcomed me into her book club. The young family down the block whose children insisted on helping me carry groceries. I hosted them for dinner one Saturday evening. Nothing fancy, just lasagna, salad, and a pie cooling on the counter. But the laughter that echoed through my dining room that night felt richer than any banquet I had ever sat through at David and Rachel's home. These people barely knew me, yet they offered me more acceptance than my own family had in months. David eventually came around, cautiously at first. He began calling me once a week, sometimes just to talk about work, other times to check on me. There was no grand apology, no dramatic scene. Instead, there was effort, small but steady. He asked about my garden. He listened when I spoke. And slowly, I began to believe that he wanted to rebuild trust, not just patch over the damage. It will take time, but I can see the man I raised trying to find his way back. Rachel, on the other hand, remained distant. Civil when we crossed paths, but cold beneath the surface. I could tell she still believed I had overreacted, that I should have been grateful for her plans. I've stopped waiting for her to change. Some people never do, and I've accepted that. What matters most is that I changed. I stopped sacrificing my well-being for the illusion of family harmony. I stopped letting guilt guide my choices. And I learned that sometimes love means letting go of toxic expectations, of manipulative bonds, of the idea that loyalty should be blind. When I sit on my porch now, coffee in hand, I don't feel bitterness. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I listened to my instincts, that I found the courage to set boundaries, that I chose peace even if it meant stepping away from people I once trusted. I won't pretend the journey was easy. Betrayal never is. But resilience grows in those moments when you decide you deserve better. And I do. So here I am, 64 years old, living not in the shadow of loss, but in the light of a new beginning. My house is filled with laughter, my heart with calm, and my future with possibilities I had almost forgotten I could claim. And if you're listening to my story, wondering whether it's selfish to protect your peace, let me tell you it isn't. Sometimes, choosing yourself over toxic loyalty is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey. If any part of my story resonates with you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and maybe tell me where you're listening from. Because your voice matters. And together, maybe we can remind each other that peace is always worth fighting for.